Hello and welcome to VHTB, your guide to the talent, culture, and finance side of the space startup ecosystem. My name is Seyka Mejeur from AdAstra, and I'm joined today by Matt Gjertsen from Better Everyday Studios.
Hello.
Hey, Matt. And Justus Kilian of Space Capital.
Hey, everybody.
Hey. All right, you guys. Today, I wanted to jump into talking about how deeply technical individuals move into executive roles. And more specifically, I often am seeing deeply technical people moving up kind of a more standard ladder into an executive role and dealing with a lot of friction, psychological friction, because they feel like they're not doing enough or doing as much, that a lot of these strategic and managerial tasks that they have to take on feel like a distraction from the work instead of being the work. And that transition can be really difficult. That is exacerbated when people are going from being deeply technical individuals, maybe even technical managers at larger organizations, and then moving into a founder role where they need to look big picture. They need to be clear about what goals each of their departments that they're overseeing are trying to reach, getting alignment within the organization, getting people rowing together, and they're juggling the demands of a growing startup. And their safe place, frankly, might be having their hands in the weeds. So I'd love to start by Matt getting some of your thoughts here. Like, do you see people having trouble making the jump from muscle to mentor and feeling like they aren't doing enough?
Yes, 100%. It is the problem. I mean, I on my other podcast, the Leadership Launchpad, where I talk to engineers who have made that transition, it's the number one question I try to ask people of, like, why is it so hard to make the jump? And the number one answer I always get is people become engineers because they like to solve problems, right? And so they want to be in the weeds. That's everything you are rewarded for earlier in your career as an individual contributor or back in school is about solving the problem. And so making that change is a massive problem. And I think, just to say, there's a number of challenges with that. I think one of the things that I've seen work that people say is successful, the ones that I talked to that did make that transition and they did it really effectively, it has to do with kind of like reframing the problem of what the problem is that they're trying to solve, of successfully reframing from a technical problem to more of a bigger picture enablement problem or a people problem or things like that. But it still doesn't get away from the fact that I think one of the challenges, even if you can reframe the problem, is that the feedback loops get so much longer. When you're solving technical problems, you often get feedback right there in the moment, or even if it's a big project that's taking several days or weeks, whereas when you're at more of an executive level, the decisions that you're making, they just play out over a longer period of time. And so I think that comes back to that idea of getting that reward signal of, oh, I made the right decision. It just takes a really long time for you to get that. And so not only are you taking yourself out from what you saw as safe of working at that technical level, but even if you're successful at kind of reframing the problem in your head, just that longer feedback loop can be really difficult to get through.
A longer feedback loop and what can feel like less direct control over the outcomes, right? And so again, having to reframe how you are approaching your connection to those goals. What sort of tools or practices do you recommend to measure progress and even to bring those longer loops in closer so that you are able to see more traction?
Yeah, I think there's a couple things, a couple different directions that I go with this. It reminded me of a discussion, actually, because in the notes, you mentioned executive presence as being a thing of when you go up there. And I was on a podcast a few months ago where somebody asked me the question flat out. They're just like, is leadership even something that you can train? Like, is it something that you're just born with? And so I asked the question of, in the companies that you work with, or the people you talk to, what do you think is the number one big picture leadership trait that people lack? And they said executive presence. I said, okay, what do you mean by executive presence? And they said, well, kind of the ability to like think farther ahead or focus on the big picture problems versus the tactical problems. And we kind of got through it. And I was like, okay, well then let's boil this down to what's one thing that you can do. What's a simple strategy that you could do? Find one meeting this week that you're not going to go to. What's one meeting, what's one email chain, what's one decision that you normally make for your team, and just try to not make it and let the team make it themselves, or let the other person make it themselves. I think just like we're very iterative in the hardware that we create and the software that we create and the things that we're trying to do, we can be really iterative in our ability to build up ourselves as leaders. And starting with small decisions that you are normally involved in and not being involved in them, I think is the first step towards helping build trust with your team and letting other people do things.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense, because the delegation piece can be terrifying, right? So I really like that model that you're suggesting here of pick one thing and try it out, right? It doesn't have to be this big sweeping thing, but let it run through your system. Since we're often working with very deeply technical people, it's so funny. Let me back up here. I often feel as a non-technical person who's working with the brightest people in the world, I feel sometimes disadvantaged in these conversations, because I'm like, what do I even have to add? And what's funny is, flashback to one of our previous podcast episodes, sometimes it's saying some pretty simple stuff that actually really is quite helpful. So I think that a big area of opportunity for these deeply technical people is to see these things that can feel big and meaty and qualitative, and this massive lead time to see outcomes that you have to control people to get, to really try to simplify it, right? Yeah. So if that's our goal in a year, what does that mean our goal for the quarter is? And how are we tracking? How can we quantify that? And how are we tracking that so that we have alignment across all these groups for the quarter that we are keeping our eye on throughout, right? And that you go, yeah, sure. And you go, no, that could be a huge framework for how the business works. And it's not as complicated as any of the technical work that you've been doing, but it will help you really get your tires into the dirt so that it doesn't feel like it's just spinning. And we go, yeah, that's the goal out there. Go, right? We're bringing it in tighter.
Yeah, no. And I think what you're saying is all about, it's about communication, really distilling your ideas down. It's like the Albert Einstein quote, like, if you can't explain it simply, then you don't actually explain it, or you don't actually understand it. That, I think, can be a good way to approach these problems, because one of the reasons why delegation is so hard, one of the reasons why it can be hard to come up with like shorter term milestones, is honestly because we don't know what we're doing. And when it's just us, when it's just you can fumble your way through it and try something, it doesn't work, so you do something else, and you can just make mistakes and learn really quickly. And just by the nature of separating yourself by one rung and having somebody else do it, that cycle is going to be a little bit slower. And so what that means is you have to spend more time on the front end, making sure you clearly understand, like, what are we trying to do? What is the next logical step? And explaining that as clearly as possible.
It's really good. It's really good. When it comes to figuring out how to trust your teams, that's another question, right? We're looking at delegation and going, okay, here's one decision I'm going to try not to make. Any advice that you have, Matt, on figuring out how to trust your teams, and maybe that has to do with being okay with some error. But yeah, I'd love your thoughts.
Trust fundamentally breaks down to three questions. Do you believe they have the skills they need? Or can they do the job? Do they do the right thing? And do they care about you? If you trust somebody, you believe those three things to be true. And that's why trust is very conditional, right, of the situation. I might trust somebody at work, but I'm not going to trust them to watch my cat or something like that, right? Because it can be very different. And so if you find yourself struggling to trust your team, I would ask yourself, which one of those three questions is the answer no to? Do I think they don't have the skills? Am I not confident in how they make decisions? Or am I not confident they actually care about the situation and about me and about the team? Right? I think those are the three questions that you want to ask yourself.
So can you repeat those three again? Can they do their job? Do they care about me?
And do they, are they going to make the right decision? Like, do they do the right thing? Because that, asking those questions and figuring out which one is no to, can start you down the road of a roadmap towards fixing that problem, right? If you don't think they have the skills, okay, what's the skill? How do I give them those skills? How do I train them? How do I try to assess whether or not they actually have that skills? If I believe they have the skills, but I just don't know why they make decisions or how they make decisions or that they're going to make the right decision, well, then let's clarify what the ask is, to make sure what's going on. And if I don't think they care, well, then it's just a personal issue where maybe you need to spend some time getting to know them as a person and not just as a coworker. But I think asking those 3 questions can help you figure out why you don't trust them. And that's then how you can fix it.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's really helpful. I love that 3-part framework on trust to be able to identify what's missing if you're feeling that anxiety. And frankly, some of it may also have to do with reliance on your control, right? Your muscle. We're talking about the tenacity and the drive that comes from the people that are called to these positions. And they're used to being able to move mountains. And so you go, I know what I can do. Most people can't do what I can do, right? And so being able to figure out how to transfer that, because your lever arm, right? You've got so much more ability to make an impact as you do start moving these teams around, and making that jump is hard.
Yeah, and that's, I think, almost a separate question from the trust side. Even if you trust someone, the other emotions that came up there are fear and ego. I'm afraid of what it's going to mean for me if they make the wrong decision, or I have the ego to believe I'm just always correct, right? And so again, asking that question of what's stopping me? Is it trust? Is it fear? Is it ego? Can then help you down the road of fixing that problem. Because like with fear, it's understanding, okay, like maybe let's narrow the box so that the potential outcomes aren't quite as bad, so that I don't have to be as afraid. And if it's ego, I mean, that's kind of just something you have to get past sometimes if you want to have a bigger impact.
Yeah. That's really good. That's really good. Justus, how do you assess this, right? In founders, how do you assess strategic approach and the ability for founders to let go of the technical work and look up to the big picture? How do you think about all of this?
Yeah, well, we've talked about trust a number of times, and an investor, building a relationship with a founder is very much a trust-based situation. I mean, oftentimes these relationships, are lasting 10 years or more, now in some cases 15, 20 years. And so in many ways, it does have, sort of like a marriage dynamic to it. And at the center of that, really has to be trust. And so oftentimes when, we're engaging with folks, it's before they've even left their previous job. They're starting to think about what comes next, how they approach that question, how they start to, what questions they're asking, who they're able to engage and what type of information they bring to bear tells you a lot about that ability to think more strategically or that higher order executive function. And then as that information starts to assimilate, are they able to give you a crisp diagnosis of sort of what they're going to do, why they're going to do it, what actions they're going to take? And so that, I think, is sort of the first thing in an ideal situation with a founder we're starting to do. We're building a relationship. We're getting to know each other over time. I'm, sharing how we think and how we can be helpful. And they're also sharing how they are evolving in their reflection of next steps and what a business can look like. If we don't have that and it's a little bit more sort of time bound and urgent, then you have to sort of look for, I would say, just more basic observational markers around, can they tell a story clearly and take something that's very, very complex and, give you just a simple one-line summary of what it means? Do they have the ability to break it into milestones like we talked about? Do they understand, the nature of what they're building and how that translates into a business? Like, you're going to need capital. What are the different types of capital that you might need? You're going to be building a P&L and, an income statement. How do you actually think about like revenue flowing through the business and cost? Do they consider like counterfactuals and risks? Is there something that could change their mind, or is there some sort of existential threat to this idea that they're bringing in? Those are things that I'm sort of teasing for, when I'm having to more quickly assess, that sort of executive function.
Yeah. How do you approach when you see signals or red flags for technical founders like resisting delegation, right? Or thinking I'm just gonna do everything.
Yeah. Well, there's a number of red flags that I'm looking for. Some of the most sort of obvious are like those, weekend rescues, or sort of like the CEO is just going to push through, and like through their sheer will, they'll push them through this next milestone, right? Like the velocity then depends on the founder's ability to commit, and that, avoids like the team having broader ownership. Are they under leveling their hires? So like, they're still the most capable person. Ideally, they should be bringing on people that are much more capable than themselves, right? And then empowering them. If they have a board, like has the board experienced some sort of whiplash where have set expectations, or, tried to like anchor to milestones and now they've missed it, or they have a shallow understanding of like their pipeline, a customer. And so, but arguably I'd say the most like concerning of those red flags is ultimately decision paralysis, right? Like they sit in a situation and they sort of like hoard the decisions, but like can't give the direction quick enough for the team to sort of move on. And that ends up really being a breaking sort of factor.
Something that as I was listening to Justus, is this maybe part of the reason why, at least from what I hear, often VCs are really excited when they see co-founders versus single founders, because like that maybe means like right from the get-go, they divest, they're like, I'm not good at this. And so they must at least have some way to trust other people. Is that maybe part of that equation?
Yeah, I mean, I think so we've talked about the importance in past episodes about reflection and understanding strengths, and, hiring for your gaps. And so at the simplest level, having a co-founder that has a complementary set of skills is very attractive. It shows an awareness that is necessary to be operating at that level.
Yeah.
So that translates into the numbers. I don't have the research off the top of my head, but longitudinal studies have shown that co-founders typically outperform single founders. It's, they're more resilient. They sort of share in the harder decisions and the really difficult moments, and it increased sort of the longevity of a company. So
startups are notorious for people saying, well, I wear a bunch of hats, and that's necessary, right? People they move completely out of their zone of expertise and take on a new task and a new domain because that's what's needed, and that is what's needed, and it makes a lot of sense. I think that sometimes can build this belief in executives that they need to learn how to do each thing before they hire someone in to be able to do it. Okay, well, I'll teach them how we do it here. There's a great book that I recently read called Who Not How. It comes from the brain of Dan Sullivan, who does a lot of business operations work. And his vision really redirects from that. And it's not about, okay, you learn how to do it really well so you could teach someone, but instead go look for somebody who can do this way better than you can and bring them in to leapfrog your business. And so I just want to echo that sentiment here, right? When you were talking about if they're undervaluing or under leveling the teammates that they're bringing in, they go, okay, I'm just going to have to mentor everyone. Again, it's relying too much on the sheer force of will, relying too much on the muscle of the leader, as opposed to give them that freedom so they can operate in their zone of genius and their unique ability to move the company forward.
I think it's really about changing what it means to be a good leader, and like really having that separation of what it means to be effective. I always go back to like Tim Ferriss's 4-Hour Work Week and some of the stuff that he talks about when he started his company, where it's like, and one of the main takeaways I had from that book is like, you should be able, if you can't walk away from your team for 2 weeks and be completely out of communication and have the team still function, then you're doing something wrong. Like, I get that in a highly dynamic startup like that, that's not always going to be the case. Like there's too much happening. But the point being, like, if you're always the key piece, then you're actually holding your team back. And it really is about, whether that's hiring at a higher level or having clear expectations or whatever it is. But if you're always the key factor, then you're the limiting factor.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, many of the founders that I've worked with could not step away for an extended period of time. Some of them have been successful, But I think that you're right. The velocity that they could have done things if they were empowering more of the team to achieve, and implement on these great things would be much, much faster and much, much more empowered. So,
man, this has been a really meaty and powerful conversation. And I just want to take a moment to say to founders who are listening out there, I know it sounded like simple stuff, but we really do understand the gravity and intensity. Like, this is some of the hardest stuff that there is. So for the founders who are out there who are like, oh man, that sounds like a lot, we get that. So to summarize a lot of this, as a technical professional, being able to reframe the problems that you're facing as you're moving into this executive function, put numbers on what you can, so you are tracking metrics and you are able to look at this problem set in a way that you're familiar with utilizing information. When feedback loops get really long and have to integrate a lot of human psychology, figure out how you can pull them in tighter and have space for the discomfort that comes with those really long feedback loops. Executive presence and how much the delegation is a new skill and a new muscle that has to be worked. How trust, I'm just going to cite, Matt, what you brought in here, the 3 parts of trust. If you're feeling like trust is missing, identifying, is it because you're concerned the person can't do their job, that they don't care personally, or that you don't know that they are going to do the right thing, or kind of their process in deciding what the right thing is. And understanding that for these founders that we're working with, they are some of the most capable, the most brilliant, the most able to move mountains and accomplish things by sheer force of will. And that has been a superpower that has gotten you to where you are. And it will make you a bottleneck that will hold your company back. Will not get you. It got you from there to here. Will not get you from here to there. And that's also complicated and difficult and worth it. Thank you both. This was really fun.